Spider-Man and symbiotes abound when Mysterio starts making waves. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is an irate review, and today we're going to be talking about Symbiote Spider-Man #1, written by Peter David with art by Iban Coello. And overall, this is going to be taking place in the past when Mysterio was a criminal, and it's going to be creating a little bit more focus around that character, as well as this heist that he's got planned, and it's going to be back in the day when Symbiote Spider-Man was a thing, you know, before Venom came about, and while he had this alien space spider suit. So I'm excited to see where this one's going to be going and how it impacts continuity. So let's dive in and see what's up. Symbiote Spider-Man takes Peter Parker back to just a short time after the events of Secret Wars. The suit is still thought to be alien technology, and he has no idea what kind of effects it is having on him. But when we start this issue, the focus is actually on Mysterio, who will be playing a larger role inside the plot moving forward. His helmet is cracked as he lies on the ground, confronted by Spider-Man and wondering how he ended up in this situation. However, things don't feel the same. This new black suit Spider-Man is a lot more aggressive than usual, yelling at him to stand up so that he can be punched like a man, likely the first sign that Peter is acting out of character due to the influence of the symbiote. The excessive force and frustration lead Spider-Man to web Mysterio and swing him around like a ragdoll before we flash back to a previous time in the story. It turns out that Quentin Beck, the man behind the Mysterio mask, had met up with a former friend from MIT where he was studying, but both of them now have the common thread of working in crime. Johnny is inside the Kingpin's organization, which seems to give him a sense of superiority over the man called Mysterio, especially since every time Mysterio has gone up against Spider-Man, he's been beaten down. He probably couldn't even take down the Power Pack, and in the future, he loses to them as well. It's a sad jab at Quentin, but it doesn't make it any less accurate. Outside of Old Man Logan, where Mysterio was the reason behind Wolverine's slaughtering of the X-Men, he's never really struck fear into the hearts of heroes anywhere. That is the biggest difference between Quentin and the Kingpin. Fisk has real blood on his hands, and that sets them apart. But this meeting isn't about who has the longest cape. It's about a bank robbery that Quentin has planned, and he was looking for help, but it seems that Johnny isn't interested. As we flash forward, we're in a nondescript building that we can only assume is the bank in question, when a teller opens up a box, finding a gas mask just in time to put it on before passing out like the rest of the patrons. Then, appearing majestically out of the mist is Mysterio. After some witty banter, the operation goes smoothly, which for Mysterio means that something needs to go wrong. A security guard that was in the bathroom is still conscious, which is odd since there would still be gas in the room. He attempts to stop the robbery, but Mysterio smashes him across the head, but not before an errant shot hits the teller in the chest, leading to an unintended fatality. This breaks Quentin, since he's never really killed a person before, and ends up smashing his helmet in the alleyway in sadness. As we dive into Chapter 2, it becomes clear that we are back in the current storyline before the opening scene, which is confusing. While you can piece together the timeline based on what is happening later in the book, it would be easy to assume that all these events are taking place at different times and are completely independent of each other. Spider-Man has a painting in his hands, and he makes a monumental leap between the Twin Towers, which are still standing at this time, as well as a joke about the failed Spider-Man Broadway show that would come in the future. The battle with the Human Fly is short-lived, with Spider-Man recovering the Scream, but the fight does little else in the way of moving the story forward. If anything, it serves as setup for the announcement from J. Jonah Jameson and the confrontation Spider-Man will have with the Human Fly in future comics. At this time in comics, Spider-Man was also seeing the Black Cat in a sense, so we find her making her way into his window, not in the standard leather outfit, but in street clothes, and wearing a face that would really remind you of Pamela Anderson. While the conversation takes place, it seems to be more concerned with establishing that Felicia has an inkling about the suit, that it was more than some sort of alien technology well before anyone else did, and Peter is being willfully ignorant to that fact, which kind of steps on some of the earlier stories. However, we can give some liberty to Peter David, since he was writing Spectacular Spider-Man around that time that the story takes place. Over the next few pages, we decompress the story as Peter adds depth to the relationship with Felicia, since he brought her to the grave of Uncle Ben to maybe give her some insight as to why he acts the way he does. She spends some time with Aunt May as Peter chases after Mysterio, and this moment serves as the intersection of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. In all honesty, it doesn't do much for me story-wise, but it does set up the fact that Mysterio is basically done with being a villain. However, that was pretty clear in the single panel earlier in the story when he smashed his helmet on the street. Sometimes a single moment like that can communicate more than words really can. When we pick up with the battle later on in the day, Spider-Man and Mysterio face off, leading us to a moment that opened up the issue with his helmet cracked open and lying on the floor. In a brief moment of deception, Mysterio lies to Peter, and it's just enough to distract him before setting off a series of explosions within the building that forces Spider-Man to escape by smashing through a brick wall. However, we bounce back to earlier in the day without any note, when Felicia and Aunt May are still at the gravesite. In an odd exchange, May understands that friends and lovers can be the same thing and urges Felicia to convince Peter to go back to college, but the entire scene feels out of place, even though it is juxtaposed with the recent near-death of the wall crawler. One thing is clear on the final page. As Spider-Man walks through the alley, Mysterio is now determined to find out what is behind this new suit and has a fresh resolve when it comes to his life of crime. As we conclude Symbiote Spider-Man number 1, we start to ask ourselves a few questions, and one of the first one that pops into my mind is why? Why do we need to go back and revisit this time in Spider-Man's life and specifically call out the moments with Mysterio? Is this a way to tie into an upcoming film from Marvel? Are people just that hungry for nostalgia? Don't get me wrong, the stories of Spider-Man and his symbiote suit were some of my favorites and helped me define the character, but every story should say something, and it feels like this book is going to be more about Mysterio and how he develops than it will be about Spider-Man. The symbiote is just a good way to market it. However, some legwork needs to be done over the next few issues to justify the existence of the story. As for the art, I'd consider it a mixed bag. In scenes where action is the central focus, Greg Land does a good job, though his scenes are heavily pulled from photo reference. It's not a bad thing to use reference, but when the image defines the art more than the spin you put on it, the scenes tend to feel wrong. This is also a clear contrast to Iban Coello's work in the flashback, which feels fresh and makes me wish that he was penciling the entire book. Things get even more questionable when Peter and Felicia are outside their costumes, and the facial expressions and character acting seem to contradict the scene they're in. When you add in the odd time jumps without any kind of direction by the script, letterer, or editor, it makes the jumble less appealing. Overall, I was interested in what the story had to offer, but Symbiote Spider-Man just doesn't quite do it for me when there are a lot of stellar titles out there already being produced, and abundance of Spider-Man stories that seem to execute a bit better. But I want to know what you guys think. Does Symbiote Spider-Man stand on its own, or does it miss the bar for Spider-Man fans? Hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books and more.